Welcome to the Sanity Project podcast, the place for internet technology professionals whose work-life balance plan has imploded. We are here to provide solutions that will help the IT pro live a sane, healthy, and prosperous life. Here's your host, Joanne Victoria.
Hi, this is Joanne Victoria, the I Know What Works coach, and I am the author of 7 books, including Lighting Your Path, How to Create the Life You Want, and Pushy for a Moment, Instant Solutions to Everyday Challenges. I'm also the host of the Sanity Project podcast, and I partner with IT pros in telecommunications, technology, entertainment, and mass media industries whose work-life balance plan, actually work-life integration plan, has imploded. I interview experts in all areas that will help the IT pro and also others who listen to the podcast but try to do it secretly. And I have guests about leadership, anxiety, relationships, money, health, and wellness. And today our guest is most related to health and wellness and stress and mindfulness and all those lovely things. Our guest today is Dan DeFigio, and he is a well-known fitness and nutrition expert and the best-selling author of Beating Sugar Addiction for Dummies. That can be seen at beatingsugaraddiction.com. Dan has been featured on CNN's Fit Nation, The Dr. Phil Show, Self Magazine, Muscle and Fitness, Shape Magazine, Reader's Digest, and a host of other media outlets. Dan provides flexible nutrition counseling for emotional eaters and yo-yo dieters. And today, Dan is going to help our audience with emotional eating. Welcome to the show, Dan. How are you today?
Thank you so much, Joanne. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm doing great.
Good. Well, I see a lot of emotional eating. I, of course, must admit to being an emotional eater, but I don't know if there are levels of emotional eating. For me, it's when I get tired. Mostly when I get tired. Secondly, when I get stressed. And I try to have good food in the house all the time. And do you have levels of emotional eaters out there, or is it one single type?
Well, I actually have. It's funny that you mentioned that, because one of the things that I have on the beatingsugaraddiction.com website is a little free quiz that people can take to sort of figure out what stereotype behavior of sugar addict or emotional eater you might be. There are 4 sort of main types that I work with, and if you figure out which one that you are, there's some sort of typical first step advice for things to watch out for or some basic changes to make. So it's a free quiz, and if you find that you tend to reach for junk food or sugar when you're stressed out or when you need extra energy, take the "What kind of sugar addict are you?" quiz, and that'll start you off on the right foot.
Well, I'm certainly going to do it when we're finished recording, and I hope that the listeners will consider doing that after they listen to the entire podcast. So what else can you tell us about emotional eating? Why are people emotional eaters?
This is a big question. Stress eating and emotional eating are major problems for a lot of people, and that's kind of why I navigated into this niche of nutrition. I have been in this field for, 24 years now, and it became clear very early on that helping people with the whys of the eating was much more important than what to eat. I assumed in the beginning that getting people to understand the importance of quality nutrition was going to be the big challenge, but it's really not. It's really the underlying psychology and the behavior that gets most people in trouble. So when it comes to emotional eating and stress eating, there are 2 sort of main camps of behavior. And so I'll just dive right into those if that's okay.
That's absolutely correct. Go forward.
Camp number 1 is the mistaken belief that junk food is going to give you something or make you something. Let me give you an example. let's say you're at work and you're all stressed out because of a deadline. Your boss is breathing down your neck. You're way behind. There's no way you're going to be able to, get everything done in time. So you're worried. The stress eating urge comes out when circumstances like that happen. So what your brain is really telling you, this story that you've made up, this habit that we all fall into in one version or another, is that, well, if I eat these cookies, then I'll be less stressed. And the underlying assumption there is that, okay, let me back up one step. If you're all stressed out because of this sort of work environment, most likely what you're really seeking is a sense of peacefulness or control or less worry about what the future will hold if you don't get all your work done. There's a fear there, so you've got either fear or a desire for peacefulness or a desire for control. Well, junk food is not going to give you any of that, right?
Correct. In fact, I expect now most of it is just made of chemicals anyway.
Well, that is true. So if the urge for stress eating and junk food rears its head when you're under stress, that's your red flag to just take a moment and say, all right, what am I really seeking here in this moment? And figure out what you're really wanting. Because it's not junk food. It's not cookies. It's not what you really want. What you really want, as I said, as a typical example, would be control or peacefulness or, easing of some burden or some anxiety. So food doesn't give you any of that. So if you take just a moment and figure out what you really want in that moment, that will give you that'll break the habit of, ooh, I'm stressed. That equals eating too many cookies.
Right.
So that's camp number one, is the pretend story / habit that food is going to give me something or make me something. The other camp that is very, very common for stress eating is using food simply as a distraction. People actually use a lot of things besides food, alcohol and drugs and gambling. And you name it, any sort of addictive behavior is very often just a distraction against uncomfortable emotions. So if you're having a very stressful moment, or you're angry, or you're lonely or depressed, or whatever the negative emotion is that you really don't want to experience, it's all too easy to just reach for something to medicate yourself. In the case of the people I work with, it's usually food. I work with people who reach for junk food and sugar and that kind of stuff, or overeating in general, because that'll give your brain 60 seconds or 2 minutes of something to do besides pay attention to how upset you are.
Right.
So it's a distraction in a lot of cases too. So either folks generally are in camp one, which is the habit of using food instead of really getting what you want, or it's a simple distraction like, ooh, I feel crappy right now, so I'm just going to spend 2 minutes eating something that's lying around, and then I won't think about how crappy I feel for the next 2 minutes.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty much it, isn't it?
Those are the two big ones.
Yeah. So how does this stress eating relate to sugar? Or is it people who have to decide they need to stress eat because they're not going to face what's going on and what they really want? Or are they going to use something as a cover to distance themselves from what is going on in their lives? And how often does sugar, in whatever form it's in, play a part in these scenarios?
Well, sugar is really easy because it's everywhere. Junk food is very easy to get here in the United States. So, and actually in a lot of the world nowadays too. 50 years ago, you could get junk food, but you had to go out of your way to find it. Sort of normal food was healthy food, and junk food, you had to bend over backwards to find it. I think these days, one of the sad things about the state of the food supply that we're all exposed to is that it's kind of the other way around. The quick and easy and ready available stuff is an awful lot of junk food. There's a lot of sugar, there's a lot of chemicals, a lot of processed foods and things like that. And you kind of have to go out of your way to find something healthier.
Absolutely. Yeah,
That is
the companies who design and create new ways of forcing junk food on the people in our world, they're obviously making a fortune off the food because it can't cost much to make. All you're looking at is similar products in different shapes and sizes. And as we've both stated, mostly chemicals. And it's very difficult in real food stores to find real food. You have to search for it, as you just said.
indeed. So, one reason that people tend to reach for sugar when they're having a stress eating moment or an emotional eating moment is just because it's so readily available. You know, your typical IT pro sitting behind a computer screen all day. I mean, what's most likely in the break room right now, right? Somebody's brought donuts. There might be a candy dish lying around, some other kinds of junk food, maybe some fast food. Somebody brought in Taco Bell or McDonald's or whatever. I'm going to guess there's not a lot of mixed green salad and fresh fish in the refrigerator.
How dare you say those words to people who are in that?
I'm guessing, I don't know. Every office is probably different, but I work with
Not
a lot
much.
of folks in those shoes, so I totally get it.
Yeah.
So what is readily available is generally not very good for you. That's one reason that sugar is such an easy thing for the stress eating. And then a second thing that I run across a lot of times is that when it comes to sort of using some kind of a substance to medicate yourself from these uncomfortable emotions we were talking about, sugar is very socially acceptable. If you have if you use heroin instead of sugar, you can't just do that anywhere. Well, maybe you can. I don't know. I suppose it depends on what kind of parties you go to. But in general, sugar and food is everywhere. It's very socially acceptable. There's not a stigma attached to it like there is attached to drinking too much or using narcotics or having a gambling problem or a sex addiction problem or something like that.
Right.
Is just fine. It's kind of a socially acceptable way to medicate yourself.
And just think, years and years ago, it was acceptable to use heroin on a daily basis for your coughs, for your cold, to quiet your children down, until somebody figured out that people became addicted after they supplied them so much. And yet people aren't realizing that sugar is a similar addiction.
Yeah, sugar actually hits the reward centers of the brain just like some of these other stronger drugs. So we tend to fall into this habit of wanting to get that nice, what's called a dopamine hit, that nice fix of these feel-good chemicals. And we're genetically programmed to aim for foods that are high in sugar and high in fat, because that means they're high in calories and energy. And that's a survival thing. The caveman in us wants to find the most calories that we can find in the smallest amount. So if your brain has to choose between Ben and Jerry's ice cream and spinach, it's going to go for the ice cream just because it's got so much more sugar, so many more calories, so much more fat, and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah, I see that. I see that, and it's just seems to be a problem because there are a lot of fat people in the world now, and they're not fat from fat. They're fat, some of it, but most of it is from sugar and what it does to the body. And I'm sure you have that all in your book, Beating Sugar Addiction for Dummies. But what sugar does to the body is just, it's as if sugar was an artist's pen or brush, and you just keep adding on to it. The more sugar you eat, the wider your body gets.
Yeah, Joanne, you nailed it pretty much. Sugar affects, not only does it sort of lead you down the road to diabetes and extra weight gain, obesity, and stuff like that. A lot of the processed sugar, like the high fructose corn syrup, and the chemical sweeteners like aspartame, NutraSweet, things like that, those actually disrupt the regular hunger and fullness sensing hormones in your body. So when you eat a lot of sugar, or if you eat a lot of chemical sweeteners, like in diet soda and some diet sugar-free foods and stuff like that, you're actually really doing a lot of harm to the natural system, the appetite system in your body that regulates, okay, I've had enough to eat now. It
Right.
screws up with that signaling. So stay away from the chemical sweeteners, stay away from the processed sugar. If you really have a sweet tooth that needs fixed, a couple simple, healthier substitutes make sense. Instead of eating a sugary dessert after a meal, have a couple bites of fresh berries or cherries. So that's still kind of sweet, but it actually has some nutrients. So, you're getting something of value for the calories that you're eating in that case.
Do you know how many people say to eat fresh berries and how after a while fresh berries just don't cut it? I mean, it's real. I'm speaking as one who is probably addicted to sugar. I don't have sugar every day, and I try not to have it in the house. That's a stupid statement. I either have it in the house or I don't. But
Your words, not mine.
I know. It's all up to me. It's like somebody asked me years ago when I was still living in California, acupuncturist friend of mine, and she said, I don't know if people understand how they work, but one of the first things they do is look at your tongue. And then they can tell by looking at your tongue what you're eating and what's going on in your body. And she said, you're eating sugar. I said, how do you know? And she told me about the tongue issue. And I said, well, I shouldn't be eating them. And she said, well, how did they get into your house if you didn't buy them? And I thought, darn, you just can't, if you're trying to stay healthy on one hand, and on the other hand, you're eating bad food. I'll just call sugar bad because it doesn't have any more good now in our lives. You have to be smart about it. So I know the fresh berries are supposed to work, or cherries or cherry juice, I imagine. Although I don't drink fruit juices either because they have too much sugar in them.
Exactly.
So it's really a matter of paying attention and looking at what you want your life to be like and how you want to live your life.
Yeah, I think you really summed it up very well. I think everybody probably knows what they should be doing from a nutrition standpoint. So, Joanne, you said something a little bit ago that I thought was just great. When you talked about not putting junk food in your house. One of the things that I really work with people in the beginning is setting yourself up to make success easier, right? Keeping unhealthy temptations out of the house, out of sight, is a really easy way to help keep your eating on track without having to sort of make these agonizing, no, I'm not going to do that this time decisions. If you walk by the candy jar 12 times a day, that's 12 times you got to say, no, not right now. And eventually the no turns into, well, just this once. And then pretty soon you're right back to having 12 pieces of candy every day because you walk by it all the time.
Right.
So keep that kind of stuff out of sight. Keep it out of your house. And most importantly, and if you guys who are listening take anything away from this discussion today, write this one down. Proactive eating will save you from reactive eating. You have to plan and prepare ahead so at least for the next day or even the next meal, what you're going to have. If you don't plan, then you're shooting yourself in the foot because then you're just at the mercy of whatever's lying around. And we just talked about a little bit ago how most of the stuff, especially in the tech world, that's lying around is just junk food, and that's going to work against you. So make sure that you prepare and plan some basic healthy stuff, both at work and at home. So when you get home, you have healthy food to eat, and these kinds of smart, healthy decisions are easy.
I'm taking notes on all of this. So it's as everything we do in life, we need a plan. And, what are you going to do today? You create a plan for the day. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're a book writer, such as you are, such as I am, how do you take the time to plan to write your book, create the outline, create the chapters, and so on and so forth? And it's the same way, which is complicated and time consuming and tiring. And yet it's so easy for people to plan what they're going to eat and not buy anything and put it in their house if it's not good for them. They can do it. This is a doable thing, people. Once you're getting this far into the episode, rewind it and start from the beginning and see how Dan builds up to these particular points and why he's getting there and how it could benefit you. Don't just fob it off and say, oh, yeah, I know that because I just did that a couple of minutes ago. And the truth of it is, what I know and what I do are not the same. So for you, it would be the same thing. What you know, the listeners, what you know and what you do are not necessarily the same thing. And just re-listen to this podcast before you refer it to your friends so that they can listen to it more than once as well. So they need a purpose and a plan. They need to plan their food intake. They need to know what they're going to eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snacks. And they need to prepare and hopefully either have a food truck near their office so they can get something decent for lunch and or brown bag it because there's nothing wrong with that.
Oh yeah, I bring lunch every day because I want to make sure that I'm bringing something that I want to eat. I don't want to have to scrounge up something at the last minute when I'm out and about. So planning ahead is really the number one thing that you can do to set yourself up for nutrition success. And something I want to throw out to the listeners too, be aware of watching out for the all or nothing thinking. Because here's what most people end up doing when they decide they're sick and tired of being fat and unhealthy and feeling like garbage all the time. And I know I don't eat well and I got to make some changes. So they try to do everything perfectly after that. And then when you miss, when you make a bad decision or you miss a healthy meal or you miss a planning time or something, something isn't perfect, then they just go back. They say, well, I've blown it, right? So I've start again on Monday or on January 1st or, whenever your start again thing is. And you just go back to what you used to do. And so the end result is you haven't really changed anything. And that is a terribly frustrating and hurtful cycle of all or nothing thinking. So instead of trying to do everything right and change 15 different things in how you feed yourself, start with one or two little improvements, something really simple that you can do, such as, all right, every day, Monday through Friday next week, I'm going to bring a healthy lunch to work. That's one thing. So you do that every morning. And you do that for a couple weeks, and then soon bringing a healthy lunch with you becomes a normal thing. And you don't have to think about it. It's just like something you do. Like you brush your teeth in the morning, you make lunch, and you bring it with you. It's part of your everyday thing. And once that becomes normal, then you can make another improvement and change and make that normal. So pretty soon, 5 or 6 months down the road, you're behaving and eating totally different than you used to. But it doesn't really feel like you're doing anything different because it feels pretty normal and natural because you've built these new habits.
One change at a time, people, until you conquer it, because the body likes order. It likes to eat at the same time every day. It likes to eat similar foods every day so that it understands you, because everybody out there knows when they've eaten something that they've never eaten before and their body goes, I don't like this, they know what happens to them. So the body likes similar things. So taking, for example, as Dan said, bring your own brown bag lunch every day to work. And even when you're driving in the car, people have to remember you can get these little coolers and put food in there or have a brown bag in your car. There's all sorts of things you can do to avoid emotional and excessive sugar eating. You notice I said excessive. One of the things I'd like to ask you, Dan, is what advice has best served you over time? What do you remember?
What do I remember? The advice that I got that I remember the most? Is that the question?
Yes.
That's a great question, Joanne. Okay, I got one. I had a lady's grandmother had a quotation that she used to use all the time. And basically she said, "You cannot expect what you do not do." And I think that is just dynamite. So whatever kinds of improvements you want to make in your life or results that you want to achieve, if you're not taking the steps to do that, you can't expect to make the improvements.
There you go, everybody. Well, Dan's offering a free gift, How to Stop Stress Eating, and it will be seen the link will be on my website, on the podcast page, as well as on my fan page at Facebook, the Sanity Project Podcast. And I would ask that people go to my website, which is askjoannevictoria.com, and download a free copy of the True Self Handbook, a guide to transform your life. And please go to Beating Sugar Addiction for Dummies or beatingsugaraddiction.com. And my guess is some of the Dummies books winds up in libraries, which is a good thing. You can find it there, or you can find it, I'm sure, on Amazon and get the book. You can email Dan at DEF as in Frank, IGIO at gettingfit.com and put something in the subject line that says you listen to the podcast, and then he'll pay attention to it and answer your question, and you can go further with him there. I thank you for being here, Dan. It's been a great and important recording, because I think that even though we've heard this more than once, we need to keep hearing it again so people get healthier, lose the bad weight, and stop being addicted to sugar and curtail their emotional eating. Thanks very much for being here, Dan.
Thank you so much, Joanne, for asking me to come on your show. You're doing some really important work for people, so thank you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Take care. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Sanity Project podcast. Please go to AskJoanneVictoria.com and continue the conversation on her podcast page. And get a free copy of her book, The True Self Handbook, a guide to transform your life. That's AskJoanneVictoria.com. Take care, and thanks for being here.